When we get into the estate planning conversation, it's always a conversation about trying to communicate our values and decide how we want our legacy to look and be remembered. There are really specific times when this can be a little bit more difficult. And this we're talking about when we are dealing with someone that has some special needs. And so it's not just a luxury to have instructions left behind, but really we feel that it's a necessity because it's extremely important that this person is taken care of the way that we wanted them to be taken care of. Today, we are going to discuss special needs planning. I'm Valerie Escobar, Certified Financial Planning, and you're listening to Your Life Simplified. Today, I am joined by Kevne Sharp, also a Certified Financial Planner and Chartered Special Needs Consultant. Thank you for joining us, Kevne. How are you?
I am well, and it is absolutely my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I always love having conversations about topics that I'm actually not super familiar with. And this is one of those topics because it is so incredibly complex and I think nuanced. So thank you so much for joining me. And really where I wanted to start is from the top. How do you even provide, how do you even start this topic? How do you provide security after you're gone for someone that really can't provide for themselves?
Yeah, it is all the things that you just said about being complex and so forth, but it really all boils down to creating a vision for the person that you are charged with, care for, etc. Oftentimes in conversations, we're talking about two parents about their children. Mm-hmm. And so I really like to encourage families to start with what would you like to see as a vision for your child? Now, the thing with parents, and I'll kind of be focusing on this aspect of parents with children with disabilities. Obviously, this conversation carries over to friends and families and others that are being cared for by you. But I encourage families to try to come up with what would they like to try to see for their child. Not only when mom and dad are still around, but also for the possibly many years when the child is now without mom and dad. They've passed. Right. I'm a parent of an adult daughter with a disability, and I can assure you the thought of what's going to happen to my child when I'm gone is petrifying. So this planning has to take into consideration not only the lifespan that you share with your child, but also what's going to happen long after you're gone.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I guess what are the specifics? It feels overwhelming. And so maybe, who are we trying to put in charge of us, trying to replicate ourselves after we're gone?
Yeah, that is hard because no one can do it as great as mom and dad, right?
Yeah.
But in order to help somebody try to fill your shoes, which of course are immense and will never be filled properly, we want to put everything down in writing called a letter of intent. Sometimes this document is called a memorandum of intent, maybe a letter of instruction. This is not a legal document, but it is perhaps as important as some legal documents are, in the fact that it is a way to memorialize everything you know as a parent about your child. And I like to think of it in a few different segments because that task can seem absolutely overwhelming. But first, I'll start off with what I wish we as humans could do. So this is going to date me, of course, but for anybody who is a Trekkie out there, a main character in that Star Trek franchise is Spock, who is half Vulcan. He had this remarkable ability to be able to do a mind meld. He could put his hands on some other creatures, some other humans, aliens' head, whatever, and then download all of their information into his brain. Well, this letter of instruction or letter of intent is the reverse of that. How do you download everything you know? And I will share with you, no detail is too small to not include. So we start off in this with just introducing who this person is, who your child is, to this person that now, and this is typically used when there's been an accident, something has happened with a parent, there is a time of grief and confusion and fear, now someone's trying to step into those shoes. So the person's going to want to know, well, who are they? Of course, they probably already do know them well, but
Right.
what
Yeah.
are the details? What is a diagnosis? What is the prognosis? Who are the physicians, their contact information, what's the pharmacy, etc. But we want to get into even more about this person than just what we would initially think are the basics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We want to talk about what is their day-to-day experience like. Do they go to school? Are they in a day program? Do they have a job? Who are their friends? Who's their best and favorite teacher? How about a subject? Who are their friends? Do they attend a church or a synagogue? Who is the favorite person there? So we want to know the ins and outs of that. We also want to know things like, is there something that maybe triggers a negative behavior? If that's the case, what's going to be the response? What works best to alleviate the problem? So we're getting into all kinds of details, including, food allergies, but also chocolate milk on a Sunday morning is the cat's meow for this person.
Right.
Well, if I didn't put it down on paper, the person filling my shoes probably wouldn't know that.
Yeah. And with that, I mean, you're talking about, all sorts of things that you would want this next person to do. Is this generally like a friend, a family member, or their services? Like, who is the actual person that you find is the best to serve that role?
And, trying to think of who's going to do the best job possible is a challenging one. Oftentimes it's a family member. Okay. It could be a sibling. It could be grandparents. It could be a relative. Ideally, it's going to be somebody who's physically close. I mean, there are times when the person with a disability does have to move, and that, is completely understandable. But if not, wouldn't that be better because of maintaining friend circles and services and so forth? There are oftentimes now this is going to be somebody who's placed in the role of guardian. And there are actually professional guardians. And so where family doesn't exist, there are agencies and so forth that have wonderful people in these roles of managing the day-to-day care to what degree that looks like for somebody. But seeking and searching and thinking through who the logical people are going to be in advance of an emergency certainly is better than having to have an immediate response with an assignment of somebody or some agency that, mom and dad really wouldn't have picked otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine having several of these people would be helpful too. So it's not just all lands on one person and there's some familiarity if it's an agency, something like that.
Exactly. So a lot of this ties into who is named in legal documents. But as far as the letter of intent and what you're trying to share, you're going to want to put that detail that's going to be applicable to anyone filling those shoes. And in my opinion, when it comes to helping manage the future of a loved one that we know is maybe not going to be ever fully independent in their life and is going to need to rely on people. They might be vulnerable. You want to protect them from, predators and so forth, that the larger the circle of support that you can create and build, the better.
Yeah. That absolutely makes sense. And so we've talked about the letter of intent or memorandum, and just that thought process, right? You have to put all your thoughts in a row to execute it. And so now we're at the executing part, right? Like, how do we get this so that it is more ironclad and that can actually be affected?
Yes. So now that we've got the vision in mind from the parents, we've got as much as we can get on paper or whatever medium you choose. Just be careful. Don't put it on a floppy disk and 20 years later, no one can retrieve it. But once you've got the vision and you know what you're searching for and working toward, now the financial piece comes into play. Some of these aspects of your child's life, there are out-of-pocket expenses. So it is important to identify what are those that you're having to pay for, say as mom or dad now. How might they change Is there going to be additional housing costs at some point? What about different therapies and so forth? But what about how expenses might change after mom and dad are gone? Will they increase? Might they decrease? But if we can lay out as much of that detail as possible, we can then start our job of planning to whether there's a match between available resources and those expenses. So on the resource side, we're looking at, well, what is typically coming out of mom and dad's pocket? Do we expect there to be some sort of inheritance, maybe from grandparents that can help? Do we think there are going to be some resources from the government? And not only do we think, maybe the child is already enjoying some public benefits, such as those from Social Security, Supplemental Security Income, SSI. Maybe it's coming from the state in the form of Medicaid, helping with medical expenses, as well as some of the services that Medicaid waivers pay for. These are designed to help people be as independent as possible in the community. So there's some wonderful services that Medicaid pays for, such as helping individuals learn homemaking skills, providing mentorship, various therapies, even some social activities and so forth can be paid for through Medicaid. But once we understand what the expenses are on one side of the ledger, comparing it to the income or resources on the other, we can then identify, is there any kind of a gap? Is there something missing? Is the child going to be able to continue to live the life that we would like long after we're gone? And that's obviously for any plan, identifying where there are any potholes, speed bumps, and so forth is important sooner rather than later so that they can be addressed and possibly filled. A gap, for example, might lead a family to understand, if we want to make sure a child has what they need when we pass, maybe we should dedicate life insurance just to them and provide it in a funding mechanism that still protects their public benefits.
Yeah. And that was the next question that I was going to ask is what specifically can be done to help protect someone that is using public benefits and, enjoys them and needs to continue? How do we make sure that we don't disqualify them at our death?
That is such a tricky part. For anyone who's not that familiar with public benefits, it is an arduous process to become qualified. And so, for example, this SSI benefit from Social Security, one has to prove that they don't have much in resources, and unfortunately, it's an abysmally low number, only $2,000 in somebody's name, and they cannot have a lot of income. They also have to have a disability and so forth. Going through the application process is long, hard. Most initial applications are denied, an extraordinary percentage. I think it's 85%. But parents I encourage them to fight the fight, figure out why it was denied so you can reapply and appeal. But once these benefits are awarded, which that particular one gives you a monthly income, then it is very important for the rest of the child's life to monitor how much they end up in their name. They might be working. How does that all connect? So there are thankfully, some resources, some strategies and tools that can be employed to take resources that are for the child's quality of life, but set them aside so that from Social Security's eyes and from the state, they are not going to be viewed as problematic, or they're not going to be viewed as being too much and causing disqualification. So here's where we're looking at working with attorneys to draw up special needs trusts, also known as supplemental needs trusts. Money going into those, again, is not considered a resource for Social Security purposes and Medicaid's purposes. And there are a couple different types. It just depends on where the money's coming from. If money's coming from a third party, not the child or the beneficiary, it's called a third party trust. And those are wonderful to establish so that mom and dad pass, they have a place to put the money for their child's use. Also, grandparents cousins, friends, anybody, have a vessel to put money in there for the child's benefit that's not going to be counted as a resource. Sometimes children, I'm going to use that word, they could be adults, will end up with money in their own hands. That now becomes a problem. So, for example, a settlement, maybe a personal injury award, if it comes into their name, well, Social Security and the state go, aha, we don't need to provide benefits anymore. However, if that money that's coming from, in essence, the child's pocket can be sorted out to another type of trust, a first-party trust. Once again, it's not considered a resource, but it's still available to them. So we've got these wonderful strategies, special needs trust. We also have another one that is fairly new called an ABLE account. These were formed as a cousin to 529C college savings plans. These are 529A plans from the same IRS tax code. And they were formed in 2014. But these allow, not as much as a special needs trust will, but they will allow some money, up to $17,000 in contributions a year, to be able to, again, be out of the eyes of Social Security and Medicaid as a resource. And that is great because prior to ABLE accounts, and unless you had a special needs trust, if the child ended up with more than, $2,001 in their name in a month, that was a problem. So what did parents have to do? They had to go spend it, buy something. Oftentimes it was an unnecessary expense, and certainly didn't help the child learn about saving for a rainy day. But an ABLE account now is this wonderful vessel, and I think anyone and everyone finds value and should participate in it if they're not. But there are some tools and strategies that in planning, we can navigate the tricky line between qualification for these wonderful and valuable public benefits and having additional resources to improve that quality of life to match the vision that we have for our child.
Perfect. So, I mean, it sounds like there are just so many different tools and opportunities to be able to really care for this person after our passing, but it's going to require that big conversation because I can't imagine trying to do this on your own, without having the right legal professionals, without the financial professionals, someone like you on the team to help. And, one of the things that when we were talking before that we talked about is, putting your own safety, your own mask on first, right? And so making sure that you're taken care of prior to trying to take care of your next generation. Do you want to add a little bit to that?
Oh, yes. Oh, no, you're absolutely right. So we're just talking right now about special needs financial planning, which is a piece of the family's holistic plan. And so, yes, we have to be mindful of put your own mask on first before helping that child. Many families will say, well, you know what, when we die, we're going to leave our estate to our child, and that's going to be great, which is wonderful, except the next question is, how much might that be? Is it enough? If mom and dad had to use all of their resources and don't have anything left for a child who needs additional resources, well, that becomes a problem. So this is just a piece of the overall holistic family financial plan, albeit an important piece, but just a piece.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. You've been listening to Your Life Simplified. Be sure to subscribe and follow us wherever you are listening, and we will catch you next time.
Mariner Wealth Advisors, or MWA, is an SEC-registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in the state of Kansas. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. MWA is in compliance with the current notice filing requirements imposed upon registered investment advisors by those states in which MWA maintains clients. MWA may only transact business in those states in which it is notice filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Any subsequent direct communication by MWA with a prospective client shall be conducted by a representative that is either registered or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration in the state where the prospective client resides. For additional information about MWA, including fees and services, please contact MWA or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money. The views expressed in this podcast is for educational purposes only and do not take into account any individual personal, financial, legal, or tax considerations. As such, the information contained herein is not intended to be personal, legal, investment, or tax advice. Nothing herein should be relied upon as such, and there is no guarantee that any claims made will come to pass. The opinions are based on information and sources of information deemed to be reliable, but Mariner Wealth Advisors does not warrant the accuracy of the information. Certified Financial Planner, trademark, CFP, registered trademark, and federally registered CFP with flame design marks, collectively the CFP registered marks, are professional certification marks granted in the United States by Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards, Inc., also CFP Board. The CFP registered trademark certification is a voluntary certification. No federal or state law or regulation requires financial planners to hold the CFP certification.